Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in what will be, I hope, an engaging and thought-provoking conversation about simplification and better regulation. I am Mariana Ghitoi. I work for the European Commission in DG GROW in the SME unit. And in my team, our goal is to promote SME-friendly policy making, meaning we mainstream the SME dimension into everything the Commission does, from policy initiatives to legal proposals. As such, our team is also ensuring an important function, the help desk function for all other services, for the SME test and the newly introduced SME check. As such, we are well placed to understand what are the challenges when trying to make policies which are SME-friendly, but also what are the opportunities. I am happy to be here today to moderate this session on simplification. Simplification is a key topic, a key priority of the Commission. But what does it mean? We all know that simplification is about making rules simple, easy to understand, easy to navigate through and to comply with. But how to achieve simplification? I think that it's important to consider two dimensions. One dimension is backward-looking. It's about the existing stock of legislation and how to remove burden, how to remove obsolete requirements. And the second perspective, the second dimension is forward-looking. How to make sure that in the future our rules are simple from the onset, so we don't need to simplify them in a few years after their adoption. So this is a bit the challenge we are trying to address today. I am in company of top experts, and they will bring in unique perspective. Let me to introduce them briefly. Here to my left, I have Ms. Alena Matsono, Vice President for Budget, European Economic and Social Committee. Next, we have Mr. Kim Hagren, Senior Vice President of Corporate Law and SMEs and Entrepreneurship at Danish Industry. Then we have Mr. Paul Morrup, the Chair of the Danish Business Regulation Forum, but also, for those who know, a former member of the Stoiber Group, the high-level group in charge of simplification a few years ago. So he knows very well the challenge of simplification.
Only a few years ago.
And last but not least, we have Ms. Veronique Willems, who is the Secretary General of SME United, the Association of Crafts and SMEs in Europe. So thank you all for joining me today. The session will be organized in two parts. In the first part, we'll have presentations by the speakers, and in the second part, we'll have a moderated Q&A session, including a Slido poll. So let's start. But before starting, I would like to briefly set the context. Simplification, as I said, it's a top priority of the Commission. And in a few months, since the beginning of the mandate, the Commission has already adopted 6 omnibus packages and several other simplification packages. And these simplification packages and omnibuses touch key areas for businesses: sustainability reporting, due diligence, agriculture, chemicals, defense, small mid-caps, to name just a few. Looking forward, by the end of the year, but also next year, there are a number of other omnibuses planned to be adopted, including a digital omnibus, an environmental omnibus, an automotive omnibus, and others. So the Commission is making a huge effort to simplify legislation, to identify key issues, and the Commission is doing it in collaboration with stakeholders using several tools such as reality checks, implementation dialogues with stakeholders, among others. So this is the context of the European effort. So let's hear from our speakers. Let's start with Mr. Kim Hagren, the Senior Vice President of Corporate Law and SMEs and Entrepreneurship at Danish Industry.
Thank you very much. That's a long title. I'll try to... please forgive me already from the beginning. I do have 5 minutes and 5 slides. I know it's a little bit old school, but I have that. So I'll go briefly through them. Oh, no, there's no slides here. Nope. Maybe we'll have some slides in a second. Should I try again? Nope. Oh, yeah. Sorry, there we were. Here we go. That's my name. Here I am. I would just like to talk to you a little bit about a real story from so-called the real life from a Danish company I had the pleasure to meet back in 2021 when I was started charging in this area. The company which I visited in 2021 is called Proplast. It's located in a small town outside Copenhagen called Præstø, about 100 kilometers from here. They produce environmental friendly plastic and have about 60 employees. So it's a company which are really the backbone of SME production landscape in Denmark. Peter Rosenkrantz, as you can see here in the picture, and you can see up there, is the CEO. He had invited me and the Danish Minister for Business to come to see his plant, but also share his experiences about regulatory burdens. What he told us, as you can see here in the picture in the old school blackboard here, which you have from the school, he showed us that every month he had contact with not fewer than 25 public authorities, where they were all asking for data through reporting systems which did not communicate together, and often they were not shared with each other. It was the same information through different systems. 25 different authorities every month he had contact with. Therefore, he had to create a small administrative organization, including himself, just to deal with these requirements. Very little of these requirements were automated and had to be inserted manually, each month for 25 different authorities. This, of course, is a burden, not just for to do his core business, but also, of course, to his everyday life and the plant where he had to use administrative people, not to gain any value, but only to make administrative reporting. As he said to us, he's not against reporting, but it has come too much, and he's using too much of his valuable time on doing that with data which had no progress, had no value for his company. So that was 4 years ago, in 2021. So you could ask the question again, have you succeeded since then? The minister left that meeting by saying, this is too much, we have to do something about this. Small businesses cannot deal with this everyday basis on that level. So he promised to do something. Well, what are we going to tell Peter today and his company? Well, we asked our companies here in 2025, what are the biggest problems for being competitive in a small business in Europe and Denmark also? As you can see here, 79% said that it was administrative burdens who were the biggest block for competitiveness in their everyday life. 79%. Only 45% were saying about trade agreements, and labor ability was only 30%. So fewer administrative burdens are on the very top of minds as a problem for Danish companies in everyday life. We also asked them, well, which are, as you can see here, which are the most regulatory burdens that they see in everyday life. We asked them this summer, and they said, as Peter mentioned at Proplast, the reporting to public authorities is still the biggest burden for companies. But also, as you can see here, GDPR. As I said, GDPR, I've worked with that for many years. We maybe will get back to that. There's omnibuses on the way, as you mentioned, which are going to deal with that. But we are 7 years now in the GDPR in Europe. And still, everyday businesses in Denmark struggle every day with understanding the rules. They experience every day that they don't know where they've done enough. They are doing paper tigers every day, so they are not really doing any valuable work on a lot of the things they do on GDPR. So I think that's a very important thing to maintain, that here we have a huge problem we need to face. So, as I said before, you could say that companies always complain. We also hear that from politicians and public servants, for that matter, that that the companies always complain about burdens, how they experience it. It's too much. So has anything changed during the years? Well, we also looked upon that because every year the Danish Business Authority actually gives a summarize on how much does it cost to be compliant for a Danish company. As you can see here, the first 10 years from 2015 to 2023, it was almost at the same level. But in 2024, it's exploded with the cost for companies. It is a massive investment for companies in 2024. At the time where we needed to be most competitive in Europe, we have swarmed our businesses with cost on an everyday level. This is both the implementation cost, but also the everyday cost to have new systems. This has simply gone too far, in my opinion. So what we have seen is that from our pillar that we need to do something. So we have taken the opportunity in DI, where I work, to have not just discussions with the public, but also people in the Danish society, put posters up. What does this mean for our businesses, but also for your everyday life, and also for Danish politicians saying this is too much. And we have heard again and again, and I'll stop in a second, but just saying that Danish politicians often say that it's not us to make the legislation, it's all EU legislation. So here we are today at the EU forum. As you see from the Commission, a lot of being done, but we lack results. There are so much talk, and it's been there for so many years. So now it's time to take action, and the omnibuses that we see at a danger of not giving all of the potential they can. So I really do hope that we can today agree upon that we should be very, very much focused on creating true value for companies with the omnibuses on the way. And this is really the starting point of going forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Alena.
It's good panel this year, yeah.
We are running a bit late, so I'm keeping an eye on the clock. Alena, from the Economic and Social Committee, please, I would like to hear your perspective, because you are in the interface between EU institutions and stakeholders on the ground.
Thank you very much, and very good afternoon. I'm pleased to see so many people in the room interested in better regulation and simplification. And I had the possibility to participate in any panel, and I also yesterday I participated at the lecture, and we could hear in every speech the word simplification. So definitely I'm happy the word is there, but what does it mean? We have heard from the Danish minister yesterday, it doesn't certainly mean a deregulation. And today, this morning, we have heard that if we want to simplify, that was the Irish speaker, she said then it has to be felt wherever it most matters. And the simplifications is about decomplexifying, making things simple, understandable, easy to grasp. And I think that's what we needed. When we look at these 6 omnibuses we have in the legislative process, I can tell you that the feedback from the ground of my companies is that it even brings the complexity, because we are in a state of rule of law. So if you want to change anything, then you have to do it regulatory. You need to make any kind of regulatory change. And any regulatory change is a burden for companies, because they need to be informed, they need to go through, they need to understand what has been the change. I'm in the ESC, but at the same time, I'm representative of the Czech Chamber of Commerce, and I receive on a daily basis the emails from my companies asking me what's going on. Now, recently, I've received the email about the deforestation regulation, and they were asking me, what shall we do? Because we've been told that this will be postponed, but in the end, the deadline is by 30th of December, and we have to comply with the rules. However, those in the supply chain who are supposed to provide us with the information, they will have to apply the rules in June next year. And at the same time, there is an information system that doesn't work. So what shall we do? And I think we really have to look at what any kind of a decision we do, what kind of impact it makes on the ground. And as it has been said, we see really the number of the rules is increasing. The environment became very complex for everyone, not only for companies, but also for regulators themselves. Because when you ask what this particular paragraph means, they even, let's say, they struggle with the interpretation. So we really need to make it simple, everything we do. And I think that what is needed is to set up the filters, because the omnibuses are the result that we made something wrong in the past mandate, and we are correcting something what we did wrong. And it's pity that we arrived at that moment. It's important, we have to correct it, but maybe it would be much better to have some filters that will avoid any kind of administrative burden which we are creating. And we in the EESC, we were requested by the Danish presidency to bring up the recommendations, what could be done, how could we actually use digital tools in better lawmaking. And we released the recommendations on this by saying, look, we should set up these filters, meaning that from the beginning, we should look at any kind of legislative act, what kind of obligations this bring. And we looked in different member states what they are doing. And here I could bring the example of the Czech Republic. We have in our legislation that every law, when it's adopted, has to have a summary of obligations, which means this translate in a very simple way what the legal act is saying. And then, thanks to that, this creates a data that can be used by AI in the further process in order to have a clear picture. So it's important that since the beginning, the one who's drafting the law also knows what kind of obligations she is imposing. And this is very simple approach, because when you go to a lawyer as an individual person, you have a contract and you do not understand the legal act. You will ask the lawyer, tell me what I have to do, when I have to do it, and how shall I do it, and what's the sanction in case I don't do it. And that's exactly what this table of obligations is saying in the Czech legal system. And we think this could be replicated at the EU level, that in the entire system, you always know what kind of obligation you impose till the end of the legislative process. After the trilogue, you will have a list of obligations, and this will also help you to transpose the directive. That's actually a cherry on the cake, because you will not allow any kind of creativity to the member states, but you will say these are the obligations. If you want to be a bit stricter, yes, maybe go for 2 or 3 obligations on the top, but stick to these obligations. We are not harmonizing, but we are creating a consistent system. Because what we've seen is that in the end, the entrepreneur, she is the end user of the law. And only at the end of, let's say, at the phase of implementation, the entrepreneur sees where we created duplicities in the system, the so-called overlaps, meaning that I ask you the same thing, but with 2 different legal acts, with 2 different obligations, 2 different rules, but with different definitions or different criteria, what has actually happened in the reporting system. We've seen, we've been asked the same thing, but a bit differently, but then it means I have to do the internal system differently with a different consultancy company. So please ensure the consistency in the system, that we do not have the overlaps, and also that there are no contradictions. Sometimes regulators are imposing one rule which is contradictory to the other. And AI could help us on this human-based interpretation of the law with this summary of obligations to have a global picture of our legal system and see what we have created, what are also obsolete rules, because we are still having obsolete rules in the system, and could suggest what can be improved. So I think it's very important, and I have brought a picture with me because I was in the European Parliament last week together with more than 700 companies. I know you will not see it, but I can tell you we have asked more than 700 companies what they think about the simplification. And the question was, has there been a noticeable reduction in administrative or regulatory burden in the past 12 months? 98% said no. So your chambers brought more than 700 companies to the hemicycle, and actually that's the situation. We still don't feel any kind of a change. So that's why we need a new system, smart system that will avoid any kind of overlaps or inconsistencies. And I think we can use digital tools, but first we need like a human-based model that those who regulate will interpret the law. Thank you.
Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I could go many ways, but I think I'll go with a very positive approach, which really is that I participated in a meeting of the directors and experts of better regulation of the EU a couple of weeks ago in Copenhagen. And the topic of that 1.5-day conference was how to use automated business reporting as a pathway to reduce burdens and create interoperability between businesses in order for them to comply with all the different requirements for reporting in a much more intelligent fashion than what we see today. And I can go through a lot of the more principle-based topics on it, but I think if I use the idea of the Danish Bookkeeping Act, that has been an act that was introduced in 2022, where there is a compulsory system for how to make data exchange between companies and with the authorities on your annual bookkeeping, and where the system does not mean that there has to be one specific IT system that everybody has to use, but it rather means that we have introduced a number of standardized minimum requirements that any bookkeeping system has to adhere to in order to be an approved bookkeeping system by government. You don't have to use an approved, but it makes a lot of sense. There are more than 90 bookkeeping systems on that platform right now. So we have left it to the market to find out how to do bookkeeping in a way where the reporting goes directly to government. And what has been the result of that is that a lot of businesses have reduced significantly the time they spend on annual accounts. Each company on average has reduced it by 82 hours per year, simply because they now use this system. And there are so many extra requirements you can put in as long as you use a standardized system. If the tax authorities ask you to send them you specific data from your annual accounts, you can now go to the provider of the bookkeeping system who are now complied to send it directly to the tax authorities, because that's part of the parcel that they've said yes to when they have entered into the system of the minimum requirements. So this is one example from Denmark of how standardized minimum requirements for data reporting makes life a lot easier. And as we are looking into reporting as one of the very big burdens looking forward, that's why Kim had that one pillar on his chart. That's why CSRD was in the first omnibus. That's why the Danish minister has been yelling about it for a number of years. And it's simply, we can use data so much better if it's digital by default, if the regulations we introduce, the legislation, is designed with that objective in mind from the beginning, and if we ensure, as you said, Elena, that we have an only once principle that ensures that you do not have to hand in data which is very close to data that you've already submitted to another authority already. I often talk with great passion about the Norwegian Brønnøysund register. In Norway, they have a data authority in Brønnøysund, which is a town in Norway, where you're meant to go as a government authority and ask permission to gather specific data. And if they say that they already have data that's very close to that data in their systems already, then you're not allowed to do it. To try to avoid all of this duplication. So we have to go to digital by default legislation. We have to make sure we have an only once principle on data gathering. We have to set up minimum requirements for the standardization needed, because we also recognize that 90% of the time spent by companies on reporting obligations is time spent on them gathering information from other companies. and only 10% have to do with the actual reporting to authorities. And that's because if you look at CSRD and you're a subcontractor, then you have to report up and down the supply chain, and that's done in a combination of PDF files, Excel sheets, and all kinds of jazz that is non-standard. And that's where all the hours are spent. So if I were to say one thing towards simplification, we need standards, we need digital by default, we need common minimum requirements. And this should all be introduced together with, for example, the European Product Pass. We are introducing now different kinds of legislation that can actually work in tandem with this idea. So it might sound far-fetched, but it's working in Denmark on the Bookkeeping Act, and I think it should work on a much wider platform across Europe so that companies don't have to adhere to reporting requirements again and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And last but not least, Veronique.
Thank
please.
you. I would like to start by supporting the Commission a bit. You have committed to simplify the EU rulebook for SMEs. You've referred to all the omnibuses that are already there, that are announced. So again, there are a lot of expectations raised among SMEs, among companies in general. And I think we now really have to live up to those expectations, because I look back at 2008, when the Small Business Act was launched, when the Think Small First principle was launched, and where the baseline at that moment was, we have to simplify. There is no one size fits all. We need to really look at our small companies, which are the big majority in Europe. The Think Small First principle at that moment was put forward as the standard to develop policy, to develop legislation. You have developed the SME test. We have developed the SME filter. There is the impact assessments. But still we see that a majority of legislation and policy is developed starting from the perspective of large companies. CSRD is, I think, the best example. There was a requirement to do a certain amount of reporting. They have conceived the reporting with large companies in mind, the 44,358 large companies we have in the European Union. And then they realized, might not work for small companies, we'll exempt them. We'll take them out of the scope. And then the process evolved, and at a certain moment we saw indeed the questionnaires coming from all kinds of directions, because large companies were preparing to report, and as a consequence did have to look at their value chain and what was happening there, and had to make sure that they were safe as well. So they started trickling down those requirements in all kinds of forms, and like you have the 25 authorities, small companies have often more than 25 clients, and they get all kinds of surveys from everywhere. That's where the problem starts. As long as we continue designing legislation for 44,000 large companies instead of 26.1 million small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe, we will never have that right mindset to see at what is feasible, what is practical, what is useful for small companies. And I fully adhere with what you said. They have to report to all kinds of authorities, but the entrepreneur doesn't see what the added value for their company is. There could be added value if from the onset the legislator, the policymaker would discuss with small companies, we have this objective, we are thinking about these instruments, what could be useful for you? And that's a first element to be taken into account. The second element is the investment time frame of small companies. We see that when we set the 2030 framework targets for energy efficiency and renewables, that was done in 2023. If you're a small company and you invested in 2020, no way you will ever start with a new investment project by 2030, because you're depreciating for 10, 15 years, so you will never reach those targets. That's another element. Then we need to have information and implementation resources ready, and I refer to your example, Alena, of the deforestation. where indeed at the moment it's chaos because companies don't know how to comply and the system isn't there. So that's another element that we ask to make sure that by the time companies have to start preparing their compliance, the whole public system has to be ready to allow them to prepare for compliance. And then I look at the lecture that was given yesterday, and I think about the everyday entrepreneurs that we have across Europe. The majority of our companies have less than 10 employees. We have 24.5 million companies in Europe with less than 10 employees who work with their teams, who do not have an IT department, who do not have an HR department, who do not have a legal department. And I would like to invite the room to raise their hands who is really working without any supportive departments. 2, 3, 4. 4, more or less, yeah. So all others are able to walk to a department in their organization saying, I have an issue with HR, I have an issue with IT, can you please help me? Try to imagine that you are not able to do that and that you have to find the solution by yourself. That means implementing a software in your company that is able to provide all the data, making sure you understand what is required. That's all part of the Think Small First principle. And then I would like to go to my slides and invite all of you to scan this QR code and sign our Think Small First Charter, where we are asking businesses, policymakers, decision makers to sign this charter and commit to start finally drafting policy from the SME perspective, from the start, assess direct and indirect impact instead of designing something and then realizing at the end of the process that you might have to exempt or adjust for small companies. And a final one is including SME-friendly provisions, like the Only Once proposal, like longer transition periods, because for an entrepreneur, it might take more time if he's handling all things at once in his company or her company to adapt. Advise first, sanction later. Before you immediately sanction, check whether the entrepreneur has understood the obligations and give them time to adapt. Provide implementing and supporting measures. And as I also mentioned, take into account from the onset that a company has an investment time frame, that they need to be able to understand what their requirements are before we start working on the rules again. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you all for your insights about challenges. I hear your calls regarding the need to do more, to do it quickly and to make sure that this is felt on the ground. And here it is my question. Indeed, the Commission has taken significant steps towards simplifying existing legislation. Many of these proposals are still with the co-legislator, so it is unfortunately too soon to see how the simplified rules will work on the ground. But still, I think that here we can think whether the Commission has identified the right areas which are challenging for SMEs. I have mentioned earlier sustainable reporting, due diligence, agriculture, small mid-caps, chemicals, defense, environmental legislation, digital, automotive, and many others are on the agenda. What else is needed in addition to what's on the agenda? I would like to hear very concrete suggestions that I should take back home and tell my colleagues, this is the message we have from the SME Assembly regarding concrete legislation that should be simplified to make it easier for SMEs.
Sure, I'll try by being concrete in a horizontal manner. It makes no difference if you simplify level 1 legislation, if it does not trickle down to real simplification at level 2 and level 3. What do I mean by that? I mean delegated act and implementing acts, because those are ultimately the ones that are felt. The level 1 legislation normally includes the policy objectives. I've used this example 100 times before, but if you take DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act, it talks about financial institutions that have to be compliant so that they can't be cyber attacked and other things. That's a fine policy objective, but when you get to the taxonomy issued by the European Banking Authority with more than 100 questions that all your external IT providers have to comply with and report on, you are killing even big companies, let alone small companies that have no chance at all, and you don't even know who's going to use that reporting for anything. So something happens from the policy objective to the concrete implementation at an agency level, or because the Commission is giving an implementing act, and that's really where the devil is. When the Council last year did a survey of how many impact assessments were done on level 2 and level 3 legislation, out of 605 acts, impact assessments were done at 3. 3 out of 605. So if what is felt by small and medium-sized enterprises actually happens in the level 2 and level 3 legislation, then maybe that's where we should start doing impact assessments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, because we had a discussion before. That's why I didn't mention the digital tools that accompany the implementation, but they are very much needed. And this will also answer your question. In the opinion of the European Economic Social Committee, we also did some kind of a mapping what's happening on the ground in the member states, and we mentioned Denmark, but we went also to other Nordic countries, and we've seen that basically sometimes the reporting is not even needed. You don't need to ask the company to provide you with this data if you, as a public service, you already have them at your disposal. Many of public administrations already have them. If there were very efficient data spaces interconnected, there would be no need for reporting.
Yeah, I agree with this, of course, but and I also just, I don't think that the Commission necessarily, there are so many things that you can do, but right now, and I think it's very important to focus on the big agenda you have set up right now. We see a lot of resistance in especially the Parliament are going forward on many of these cases. And I also experienced that when you talk to members of Parliament in the different side of the Parliament, that they are trying to take up, when you take up, for instance, the Omnibus 1, they're trying to go back in time and the changes which we thought were good, where we had secured business, where we had secured no more sort of administrative burdens in some fields, they're taking that up again. And I think that it's important for the Commission to have some really close red lines to not going back on sort of those issues which are closed already once, so going back on that. And I think that's extremely important. I think it's important for the Commission to have a very successful goal on which things we need to go forward with. I think that's a key issue. And I would also say, as I mentioned before, some of the things besides the ESG reporting, I think that the public procurement is a very, very important area. I think we need to simplify that and make it more digitalized for SMEs to have a possibility to get into the public procurement system. I think that's the key issue in Europe. And as I said before, GDPR, not just simplification of GDPR, but also giving the possibility for GDPR to use it, so not hinder the development of new AI models, new AI production in different products in Europe. What we hear from companies today is that they don't invest as much as they could in AI production and in AI different processes because they lack in that they feel that GDPR is setting a barrier for them because they're not sure how it connects with each other. So different legislation, they don't know how to use it, so they sort of go back where you have the competitors outside Europe, which doesn't have the same concerns. And that's a problem for many small companies in the AI field in Europe. So there's also so many legislation now in place that needed to be targeted and need to be harmonized before going forward. So the legislative pause that you need to take, then take the legislation we have right now to make it a focus and have a success with that. I think that should be your purpose right now?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to give one example because if you discuss with entrepreneurs, depending on the activity, and we've heard yesterday evening, there is a heterogeneity of SMEs across Europe. Depending on which sector, which activity, the size of the company, you have other priorities coming up. I think also all business organizations at European level have put forward multitude of examples of which topics had to be tackled. I think what you mentioned is one, we have to correct the past, and with all due respect, but this time I'm going to put pressure on Commission, Parliament and Member States. It's not one and then the other. It's now immediately one and the other. So it's correcting past mistakes, and there are a lot of omnibuses announced, so apparently we've made a lot of past mistakes, but it's also ensuring to do better in the future, and that starts today. And that starts with think small first, as from today. So that's a very important one. I love the idea of making digital by default, but I also would like to give a reality check there. There still are a lot of SMEs across Europe who don't use many digital tools. So if we start moving towards the digital tools, and Alena, you mentioned it quite well, regulatory change requires change from entrepreneurs, and they're human beings, so they resist change because they have made their habits and they are used to working in a certain way. So if there is a regulatory change, they have to adapt, they have to start wondering, how do I have to start doing it now? So then we have to make sure that there is support provided. And I think when the Danish introduced the bookkeeping law, that was also facilitated by a huge effort from the authorities to support entrepreneurs in that transition. So that's a very important element. You cannot expect entrepreneurs to do it all. As one of our entrepreneurs said when we finalized the Think Small First Charter, I am a worker, I am a mentor, I am the strategist, I am the communicator, I am the compliance officer, I am everything at once. And okay, we said it yesterday, we shouldn't only look at the heroes, but I think they're all superheroes in that perspective.
Thank you, Veronique. I hear what you say about the need to work together and the issue of a shared responsibility between the Commission, the Parliament, the Council and the Member States. I would like to briefly cite the high-level expert group monitoring simplification for beneficiaries of European structural and investment funds. In the report, this high-level group noted that EU-level simplification only delivers results if national and regional rules are simplified too. So I would like to briefly hear from you, but please keep it short, what role the national simplification should play into the whole debate of simplification. Often, as we all know, EU rules are transposed at national level. We have the phenomenon of gold plating. So just to give you a flavor, what should be done at national level? Are there good practices, for example, from Denmark, from Czech Republic, that should be replicated elsewhere? What could we learn from good practices at national level in this respect?
Well, I would say, being rapporteur of the Stoiber report called Europe Can Do Better on the importance of best practices among member states, we did that report 13 years ago because we found from an explanatory note from the consortium of consultants who actually helped us do all the calculations on all the burdensome regulation, that if all member states implemented each of the acts analyzed in the same manner as the most efficient implementation, we could save 32% of burdens at an EU level. And here comes the clincher. Of those 32%, 28% were due to inappropriate national implementation, and only 4% were gold plating. It was a huge wake-up call for us. We thought gold plating was the issue. Gold plating is not the issue. It is inappropriate national implementation. It is not finding the best practice way of implementing something, whatever it is. So we talk a lot also at RegWatch Europe, where I'm currently the president, about implementation workshops, transposition workshops, about the Commission taking more initiatives to invite national civil servants to come together as they are working through the national implementation process to share best practices, because it's better to try to avoid the accidents than to try to clean up the mess afterwards.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I think what Paul also mentioned before, it's level 2 and 3, and then you could refer to level 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. Our entrepreneurs, and that's also one of the difficulties, when you ask an entrepreneur, what are the difficult EU legislations? They will look at you and they will say, what legislations? Because I only work with the legislation in my country, unless I'm working cross-border, then they also have some experience of other countries. They don't mind whether it comes from the European, the national, the regional, or the local level. They just have to comply with whatever is in front of them. And in that perspective, we've been quite frustrated with the finger pointing on both sides, member states to the European level and the European level to the member states, because as Hubert Gams yesterday mentioned, it's Team Europe. And in this perspective, Team Europe has to perform better.
Yeah, I think there is a responsibility on both sides, European, national, regional, and then, of course, you have legislative acts, non-legislative acts, because you have a lot of norms as well, and the trend is now that it should be in the legislative act, but we actually push this to non-legislative acts, to the norms that are giving the concrete parameters, but however they should have been defined in the legislative act, the same at the European level. Many concrete parameters should have been defined in a legislative act, but then they go to delegated act and implementing provisions. So yes, and as you said, of course, the entrepreneur sees everything coming all together, doesn't make any kind of difference. It comes from the EU, or in my case, from the Czech Republic. When you mentioned the need to make it understandable for companies, I could also mention the example, what we have done in the Czech Republic, because we have a tool which accompany the companies in their everyday life. And they see in a calendar, and actually thanks to this approach on obligations, in their calendar on Monday what they have to do, what kind of obligation they have towards the state on Tuesdays, Wednesday, etc. And I think it's very important to actually accompany them in this implementation, because it became so huge. You can't imagine it, how huge it is. It's been mentioned in the last mandate, only at EU level, 13,000 legal acts, only at EU level. So how you can understand this complexity? It's really unhuman. So that's why I said it's good. We are in the 21st century, at least let's use the digital tools. And what is the perspective? And I'm going back home again to the Czech Chamber of Commerce. We are looking at the entrepreneurs as they would bring their backpacks, because you have to look at each entrepreneur, at the size of the entrepreneur, which sector he, she operates, because each backpack is different. And we call these so nicely cumulative burden, because you have to see how different obligations rules interoperate in a different backpack. And I think that's the optic we have to use. And I completely agree with you. We have to do this mind shift that we do not draft the legislation for only 0.2%, but for 99.8%. That's important, because if you create exemptions, then you also open the door for other exemptions at national level. So my recommendation would be, let's go for this table of obligations, which is clear, and that it should be clearly translated to national level, that there is no space for creativity.
Thank you. Are there any good practices in Denmark that we could learn from?
I would just say I was just going to go into a specific issue actually, which I had that experience last week. I'm sorry again going to the GDPR issue, but I had an experience with I met with all of the people in charge of the Data Security Council in Denmark last week, and they mentioned to me that 95% of all data breaches, which are literally thousands of data breaches which are reported to the Danish authorities every year, 95% of them are being put in a trash can within a week or two. And nobody, it was the first time I ever heard about that. When I speak to my colleagues in South of Europe, it's not an issue. So there are some, why does Danish companies have that perception that they need to sort of go to report a data breach every time there's the smallest one in a company, which doesn't have any sort of risk for people's information? It's because they're afraid of getting caught in getting a huge fine. So there is a translation about legislation which are different in the different systems, and we still lack that. And in Denmark, I think our problem is that we're so fast at implementing, so we implement always on time, and when we do that, the legislation is not out in the companies yet. They don't have to translate it. We don't have the guidance yet. So that's an issue which I talk to public authorities every week and saying, why do you do it as fast as you can here in Denmark? Because they're not ready for it. So we need to have a sort of a common way of doing this, because it's so different around Europe. So the legislation is need to be more valid on that point. We need to have companies and public authorities speaking to each other on a more transition basis across Europe.
Well, I can say that I think what Kim is pointing to, and GDPR is a good example, AI Act is going to be the next one on the plate, is that whenever we introduce legislation where the design parameter is that each company has to do individual risk assessments, then we get into trouble, because risk assessments are really, really difficult to do. They're difficult for me as an economist, for Kim as a lawyer, but they're very difficult if you're a hairdresser. How you've never been trained to do risk assessments, but you have to do it in order to comply. So what you're saying, Kim, I've known that for quite a while. They say at the Danish Data Authority's website that they get about 500, or in the annual report, whatever, 500 announcements every week about data breaches, and 450 of them get an auto-reply from them, because they're the kind of data breaches where you've put the wrong recipient in your emails. It shoots off, and Microsoft does that more or less automatically for you if you don't turn off that function in your IT. But people think, better safe than sorry, we have to comply. It's a risk-based thing. You're afraid you're betting your company, so we better send it in, and it makes no sense. And the reason why it makes no sense is we do not get clear guidance. And as long as the authorities don't feel an obligation and a room to maneuver to give clear guidance, then as a company you're going to say, you have to go to talk to a GPO, and your GPO says we have to report and we have to put it in a logbook, and then you do it. And at the other end of it, it's just chucked out. Now, the funniest thing you can find on the Danish Data Authority's website is the critique the Danish Data Authority gave the Danish Data Authority because they did not handle confidential paper waste in the right way after they've moved from one office to another. So they gave a huge critique to them, and then they did an extra critique because they didn't report it to themselves within 72 hours.
Thank you. This makes the link to my next question, which will also be addressed to the room. You mentioned the issue of clear guidance. But what is clear guidance? What is a common understanding about clear guidance, and how guidance should be drafted to make sure that it is accessible to SMEs in a very easy and friendly way? Alena, you mentioned the list of obligation. It would be a good practice to have a list of obligation. Yes, I agree. I think this would improve visibility and clarity. But how to make sure that those obligations are designed in an SME-friendly way? Because what does it mean to have reporting which is SME-friendly? What does it mean to have due diligence obligations which are SME-friendly? And we can think about many other areas. Because we have an internal reflection exercise in our unit at DG Grow, learning from ongoing simplification processes. We try to understand what is the structural cause of burden, what it is that creates burden in our legislation. Because we introduce new requirements, often these requirements are needed to meet policy objectives, but how to make sure that all these requirements are SME-friendly by default? And we are having this reflection together with the network of SME in Voice, who was consulted on good practices at national level, because we like to have a common understanding on a number of issues which we see very often in legislation, and I have a list here. For example, tight deadlines to prepare for compliance or lack of clarity. Deforestation was mentioned here, with the IT system not being ready. We think that the timing of a legislative initiative is extremely important because SMEs need to have time to understand what they have to do, and they need to prepare to do it. They need to buy equipment, to train internally, etc. Public authorities also need time because they also need to put in place, you mentioned delegated acts, implementing acts, guidance, clear guidance, IT tools. It takes time to develop all those tools. So we think that we need to think the timing of an initiative from the moment all the acts and tools needed for the implementation are in place. Only after we can think what time is needed for SMEs to prepare for compliance. So timing of a legal initiative, something very important. It's a minor issue which is not addressed in impact assessment because usually impact assessments look at big policy options, whether to include or not SMEs, but the timing of legislation, this is an aspect which is decided at the level of legal drafting in the Commission, but also it can be changed by the co-legislator. Another aspect is, as you mentioned, the lack of guidance or IT system to support timing implementation, but you also have burdens related to access to EU funds. Inspection and checks by relevant authorities. We hear often SMEs complaining about overlapping inspections. We have sanction and fines, which are too high or inappropriate or not proportionate. We have the transposition or gold plating. We have complex permitting procedures. We have high fees for different registration and many other areas. So we try to identify the structural causes of burden and in those areas elaborate minimum requirements of what it means to have SME-friendly legislation. And based on this, we'll publish model clauses to be used when drafting legislation to inspire policymakers at both EU level but also national level. So work is ongoing and we hope to be able to publish soon by the end of the year or very early next year. But now I would like to invite you to scan the QR code and to go in the Slido poll. And I would like you to select what, in our views, are the most burdensome challenges for SMEs. Please select up to 7 aspects.
It's not very dynamic.
I think they're not.
They need to read.
Now it's happening. Yeah.
The first 2 they just fixed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think we have a drone behind us.
But Mariana, if I may, while we're waiting, I'll just say to one of your questions, I think Veronique said it, in a lot of the implementation phases that can take quite some time before you're actually there, we need carrots before sticks. We need guidance. We need dialogue. We need authorities to be in dialogue with the companies instead of being felt as a threat that is imminent and is going to hit us in the head in just a little while, because it takes time. And the perception amongst experts and authorities is that everybody must understand this is easy. The reality is that most people with the legislation now, they have to hire lawyers like Kim or business consultants like myself even to be able to comply. And it's costly and it takes time. So we need to have that dialogue. We need to have that perspective that for the first period of time, maybe even for the first year or two, we are not going to issue one single fine. We're only going to have a dialogue about why it goes wrong. We'll take you by the hand. We'll try to lead you in the right direction.
I can't agree more. And on the guidance, this will be one of our SME-friendly clauses because we need to put a lot of emphasis on guidance, but also all type of support SMEs need for implementation. So going beyond guidance, but what kind of support is needed? Do you have the final?
I think also the transposition workshops.
Yeah, maybe if I may say, you ask what should be this SME-friendly approach. I think you have 3 things to bear in mind. So first, you already have the tools, so many tools at EU level, like the impact assessments, but they are not used in the entire legislative process. And I think that's the problem. You know, you've mentioned the impact assessments, but you know, in the European Parliament, how many of the impact assessments have been made? 7.
Very few. Yeah.
Council even less.
And then at the end of the trilogue, in the end, we have the adopted text. We actually have this text with an impact assessment that does not reflect what kind of obligations we have there. And that's important. So positive thing is we already have these tools, but we just need to use them. Second thing is the common sense. I think we all need it. And third one, you have business organizations. You have business organizations here and present in the room. Just listen to them. You have so much feedback. I don't remember how many times we sent, as business organizations, a list of regulatory burdens, a list of burdens on the internal market. It's almost every year. But just, I mean, it's important that the EU institutions use them. The ESC, as an advisor of the European Commission, also sent it. So it's just important that these are read and that the business organizations are listened, and then it helps you to have a common sense to drafting the regulations.
And I think a very important element there is also, because we're now talking to DG GROW, I think the message within DG GROW, at least in the SME unit, has come across. They know, they're working on it. But we have to make sure that all those DGs who have a real impact on small companies, I'm thinking about DG Environment, Climate, Ample, they need to also observe what is going on and use the tools that are there in a good way and listen to the consequences of those tools.
A recent tool is the SME check introduced in May. This is an annex introduced in impact assessment. It is mandatory for initiatives relevant for SMEs. And this annex will accompany legal proposal in the Parliament and in the Council. And we hope this will act as a constant reminder on the need to pay attention to the impact on SMEs, being direct impacts or indirect impacts.
May I just a small comment for that. I think that impact assessment is a whole workshop and talking about that. But I think what's important is that, of course, the impact assessment follows sort of the legislation through the EU system. It changes on the way, so we have to do that. But also, going back to it, I think one of the problems that we have in Denmark is that, well, it has changed so much because the legislation has changed when it comes out to the companies. Nobody turns back and comes back and says, does it work after the intention or not? So what we've talked about, and I think what you talked about good practices, we have a discussion with the Danish authorities about having a right to challenge after 1 year after that the implementation is laws in Denmark, that we can challenge is the impact assessment is still valid. So we can go back and say, is this still valid? So that right to challenge is one of the discussions we have right now. And I think we need to have that also on a European level, sort of that we can go back and say, is it really, when it comes out in real life, does it work as you intended it? Is it still valid? And I think that system, you have to build that in because it's so difficult sometimes to know how it's going to work in reality. The omnibus on the ESG is one of the examples. We started somewhere and then we ended somewhere else. Fortunately, we're going back now, hopefully. But still, we need to have that in all legislations, going back to the risk assessment. That's important.
At the European level, we have at the RegWatch Europe website put a paper on what we call an interim evaluation. It's not a full evaluation. It's something that's done at exactly the time you're talking about, Kim. And it's a lighter tool, but we need it because the impact assessment was done so many years ago. Nobody knows what it's about.
Yeah.
To answer you very, very, very shortly, this is why the Commission has introduced new tools such as the reality checks and the implementation dialogues, because it wants to hear from the ground how it works, whether there are issues and how this can be addressed by regulatory changes. But as I said before, this is not only about impact assessment, because not everything can be assessed in an impact assessment. I have mentioned the timing of a legislation, often the timing, the date of entry into application is modified during the co-legislative process. So this is not being assessed. There are many aspects which intervene. They are very granular to be assessed in the impact assessment, but this relates to the regulatory technique. And this is exactly where we want to intervene with the SME, with the standard clauses, SME-friendly provisions, in order to provide a common base, a common understanding. What does it mean to be SME-friendly? And going back to the results of the poll, thank you all for your input. I see that reporting obligations come on top. This is not a surprise. And hopefully the Commission will manage to simplify in the end CSRD, due diligence on second place, the tight deadlines to prepare for compliance, lack of guidance or IT system to support timely implementation, and followed by burden related to accessing EU funds, inspection and checks, and third-party certification requirements. Please stay tuned and look forward to our standard clauses on the SME-friendly provisions. We are running out of time. A very brief conclusion. Simplification is a top priority. It's about existing legislation, but this is a lot about what should be done in the future to make it easier to comply. We need to put more effort at EU level, and we need to work hand in hand with Team Europe, with other institutions, with member states, with stakeholders, and we want to hear from you. And looking forward, we need to pay more attention to the role of digital tools and to making legislation SME-friendly by default from the onset. And to conclude, Veronique, you mentioned the think small first principle. It is true that over the year we have promoted this think small first, but I think that now the time is to think big for our SMEs and to do it big. Thank you.
And I wish to all of you a bureaucratic detox. Have a nice afternoon.